Okay, so I got something, I got a message there. Hopefully you heard that. Worldview includes the ideas, beliefs, values, and assumptions through which one perceives reality. And worldview is linked to one's perception regarding the meaning, the purpose, and the goals of one's life. So if two people or two different groups of people have different worldviews, then they will literally be experiencing different versions of reality. And this is exactly what happened when the Europeans first arrived in the quote New World and interacted with native peoples. As I explained in detail, these two people had, by that time, very radically different worldviews. The Europeans, and please ask me the question later, how were the differences? Because I can detail many of these differences. But let's say, suffice it to say that the European worldview was very mechanistic, and I will explain what that word means, materialistic, despiritualized, okay? The native worldview was more holistic, integrative, ecological, web of life worldview, okay? They encountered a people, the Europeans encountered a people in which practically everything that happened, whether it's attaining maturity, having a new baby, whatever it may be, planting, harvesting, planting, whatever it may be, was imbued. All these were imbued with spiritual meaning and required some level of ceremony. This in contrast to people such as Francis Bacon, who was an early scientist, who said that nature should be hounded in her wanderings, hounded. And she is to, let me see if I can find it. Well, he said that she should be made a slave, okay, right here. It says, hounded in her wanderings. She's talking about the Mother Earth, bound into service and made a slave, okay, while the goal of the scientist is to, quote, torture nature's secrets from her, okay? So then in my papers and my books and so forth, I describe this whole idea of, I talk about it's a Cartesian Newtonian worldview, right? Starting with Rene Descartes, who said that the universe is a machine made up of separate parts, governed by exact mathematical laws of cause and effect. Then Isaac Newton, then John Locke came and said that not only is the universe a machine, but also society itself is a machine. And just like in the universe is controlled and motivated by gravity, society is controlled and motivated by what? Self-interest. So here we see the beginnings of how it started out in physics, old classical physics, and it continued through time into the social sciences and so forth. Then Adam Smith, he took John Locke's thing and he said that there's natural laws, and one of them being that government should not in any form or fashion be controlling the natural impulse of human beings with their self-interest. They should be allowed laissez-faire, means without any controls, to compete for their own wealth and for their own self-interest. So anyhow, there's a lot to be said about all of that. And today, ask me about quotes of the Haudenosaunee, which we recognize as the Iroquois people, who developed one of the first, many scholars are now recognizing is one of the first democratic federal systems of nations. 5 nations, then the 6th nation. Okay, the people of the Longhouse. Talk to me about native prophecies regarding the changing in cycles that we are currently experiencing here on Earth. Just like the Baha'is talk about the shift in cycles from the cycle of prophecy to the cycle fulfillment. Native peoples are also talking about changes in cycles and how this entails much peril to the peoples, much confusion, many of the things that we are currently experiencing, right? So there's many ways that we can take this conversation. I look forward to hearing your questions, your comments. I think I've spoken enough. Again, I could go on, but I think you kind of have an idea. Let me just point something out really quickly here. Am I allowed to share screens, Tara?
John, could we do the introductions before we do the sharing of the screen?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you so much. We have already had such a lovely introduction to our day, and we'll be thinking, but I also want to carry on with the introductions of the rest of our panel. And the next person that I'll be introducing is Athena. Athena Scholas Pratt. And I will be reading it, so I'll just be scrolling down. I have to apologize. I have it here. Athena Scholas was mostly raised in New Mexico and was blessed to have pioneered with her parents and siblings in New Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Belize. Sorry, it just got lost. I'm just going to be right back. Here we go. I'm in the chat. This is technology at its very best. I'm going to read that sentence again. Was blessed to have pioneered with her parents and siblings in Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Belize. Her work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has allowed her to live in California, Hawaii, and American Samoa. As part of her work in regenerative agriculture, she is learning how traditional indigenous knowledge can bring healing to the land and people. She is the tribal member of Isleta Pueblo and returned to her maternal roots to serve, build friendships, and share the revelation of Baha'u'llah with the Native American people in New Mexico. She has served on the U.S. Seasonal School Committee for Native Americans. The Guardian said that seasonal schools are a vital and inseparable part of any teaching campaign, and that these centers could attract many souls if properly arranged and made interesting. The NSA oversees the seasonal schools, but allows wide flexibility for the Native American School Committee to use curriculum and methods that focus on the needs of Native friends. That's the end of the chat, but I think there might be more, Athena, and I apologize because we got the information today and we're trying to do that. But I'd like to invite you now to give a brief overview of what you'll be talking about today in today's presentation.
Yes, so I just wanted to focus just specifically on the tool of the seasonal schools, because part of the conversation today is how can we have more conversations and keep learning about the history and the process of unifying the world, in particular the history of Native Americans in the Americas. And the seasonal schools are one of those tools that I just wanted people to keep in mind, because we're so blessed to have our core activities and our institute process, but we also have other sets of tools to work with, like this association and this conference today.
The girlfriend.
Thank you very much, Athena. So we'll remind everyone to please keep themselves on mute. And I can go through and do that if someone forgets, because we have some people that are sort of having some comments right now. I'd like to carry on with the presenters if I could. And the next presenter I'm going to be talking about is Jeff Kiely. So I'll introduce Jeff, and then he'll also have the opportunity to talk a bit about his presentation today. Jeff Kiely, who has a BA in Interdisciplinary Studies and Organizational Leadership and a Master's of Education, became a Baha'i in 1971 and has since served the faith in a variety of roles in the US and as an international pioneer. He and Navajo teacher Helen Yazzie married in the Hogan of renowned artist and Baha'i teacher Chester Kahn. The couple helped establish the first local spiritual assembly in the Rauma Navajo community and was among the first caretaker of the Native American Baha'i Institute, established in 1982. Jeff worked for many years implementing and leading programs dealing with substance abuse treatment and prevention. He now operates his own consulting firm, Kiely Consulting. Jeff, we'd like to invite you to say a few words about your presentation today.
Well, hello, friends. This is a wonderful honor for me. I'm Jeff Kiely, and I have lived in Navajo land for about 45 years and have learned much and still much to learn. In today's opportunity for all of us, I believe it's very important for us to all be aware of the real history involving Indigenous America. And we will come to understand that religion has been quite the double-edged sword, often disruptive and undermining of Native lifeways, and often a tool of forces that were very destructive to Native lifeways throughout the whole hemisphere. I think it's also very important for us to be very aware of the old world order that we're all coming from, particularly those of us who come from backgrounds that are non-Indigenous, from other legacies and other backgrounds, because we carry this with us often unconsciously. And it's been my experience that while we carry this into our new relationships with Indigenous peoples, we sometimes cause difficulties in ways that we did not intend when we reached out and came to visit. And in that light, one of my counsels to non-natives wishing to live and work among Indigenous people is to hold fast to the principles of accompaniment and to the concept of no personal agenda. This was one of the concepts that a revered counselor back in the day, Fred Schechter, came to the Navajo reservation and met with all of the pioneers at that time. And that was his central message because of the conflicts and difficulties that had arisen among the Friends. So my role today is with all of you to listen to our wonderful Indigenous panelists and to weigh in whenever it's appropriate. So it's wonderful to have everyone here today.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And so I have the honor of introducing one more panel presenter today, and then he will also have the opportunity to give an overview of his presentation. I'd like to welcome Alfred Kahn Jr., son of Tina and Alfred Lee Kahn. Alfred is Osage people of the Middle Water on his mother's side, and born for Navajo Bit'ani clan on his father's. He delivered a speech at the White House as a Coming Up Taller award recipient in 1997, and in 2000 ran for race unity by taking part in the Spirit Run from Seattle to New York. Alfred currently lives in Albuquerque, practicing architecture and teaching at the University of New Mexico. He also animates junior youth groups in South Valley and at the Isleta Pueblo Reservation. Nephew of Franklin Kahn, the first Native American to be elected to the National Spiritual Assembly, Alfred shares his perspective on growing up among Baha'i pioneers on Indigenous land. He also shares his candid assessment of the prophetic promises in the Baha'i writings about Native Americans' potential to contribute greatly to the peoples of the world once they have reconciled their own traditional views and teachings with the global promises of Baha'u'llah. Welcome, Alfred.
Thank you. I really just wanted to honor everyone for joining the circle and appreciate everyone for being here. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay, good. So I think the first thing I wanted to just start by acknowledging a couple of people who were instrumental in helping me write the article, which of course are my uncles Chester and Franklin Kahn, who passed away. And I just wanted to share a brief anecdote from my uncle, who, when he had a renewed connection to the Baha'i Faith, he told me that everything that he's done, it's my turn to continue on. So I hope I'm doing a good job. And I think we're doing it through the junior youth groups. And he was the first one to actually host a devotional at the first expansion phase in Flagstaff. I know many of you knew my uncle, or maybe many of you knew my uncle and might have known that there was some challenges. He had a renewed connection before he passed away. He hosted a fireside at Macy's coffee shop, which is one of the most powerful firesides that they had ever had. And he invited everyone to be a member of the Baha'i Faith. And he also had a devotional gathering at his house in the first expansion phase. And I feel like he's here with us. And also Linda Covey, who was my editor, one of the editors for the article. And she was the one who really, she encouraged me to do it. And she was, accompanying me every step of the way. And I'm really grateful to her that she was there with me through that process. And she's passed away since, and I just want to acknowledge her and thank her for her contribution. And they're all here with us today. So I think one of the things I wanted to share with everyone, before we get started, is that, there are some simple ideas that I think are deceptively simple, and they're challenging, when we're, I think I'm hoping that at least one or two of you are thinking about pioneering in Indigenous communities, or you are. And so there's a couple of concepts that I hope we can reflect on and deeply meditate on, because I think they're so simple that we think we already got it. And one of those is unity and diversity. Unity is, I feel like right now, a lot of people are at a place where it's a dichotomy. Either you can be united and homogenous, or you can be diverse and separate. And I think where this emerges is when people have approached me and said, well, why are you so interested in your Navajo culture? We're headed towards unity, so your culture is not going to matter in the future. And these are really deepened people in the Baha'i Faith, and I was really surprised to hear this comments. And I think it's fairly pervasive, especially among scholars, that cultures kind of don't matter because we're just going to all be unified in the future. And I think what that carries with it is a lot of loaded challenges, because people believe that unity will be their vision of unity, which is the way they are. And there's a homogenizing undertone that's really deceptive and powerful, that still is very pervasive. And I think we're healing through it as Indigenous people. And if you're Indigenous and part of this conversation, I think you know what I'm talking about, is that sometimes you have to justify why you have your cultural expression. And I have my cradle board next to me that I helped raise my kids with, and the Navajo wedding basket. I still have the Spirit Run t-shirt with me. And this was made by my Uncle Chester. This is some of his silversmithing that he did. So these objects, people wonder why if you're going to be a deep in Baha'i, why do you continue to learn about your culture? And not many, but there are some who understand, and I really appreciate those who understand why unity and diversity has a power, because we are allowed to be diverse and to be unified. And it's a false dichotomy to think that either you get your diversity or you get unity. I think this very simple concept, unity and diversity, is one we're still continuing to learn. And if you're going to pioneer on Indigenous land, I hope you meditate on that and think about it and learn about it, what it means, because I don't think we figured it out. There's a power in those words. I think, I hope that everyone is encouraged to come to Nabi. I grew up around Nabi, and I really want to honor and thank Jeff Kiely for being part of the panel. He was my animator when I was growing up, and it was before there was animators. So he was just my mentor, and he was everything that I learned about animating. He was already doing it, and I think a lot of people did understand these concepts, and this training process is powerful. That the Institute process that we have now is really helping us to utilize this framework that was already constructed, I think, back with Abdul Baha. He had this framework in operation within his life. You see the way he would accompany people and walk with them, until they were able to grow and understand. And when they were capable, he shared things with them. And I would just want to thank you and acknowledge Jeff Kiely for being here. And also Athena has been my co-animator, and we've struggled to start initiatives of junior youth group on Isleta Pueblo and around our tribes. And I just want to thank her for being here as well. and honor and acknowledge that we're here on her land. So I just, I hope that, you know, you all feel encouraged and welcome, and you bring your honest and frank questions that you have in your heart. And, you know, I hope that if you get the opportunity that, you know, there are Indigenous people in every city in the United States and Canada and whatever place you're at. You know, I have a brother who's down in Australia right now, I believe, Chris Cavelan, and he works closely with Indigenous people down there. And, you know, we're connected all over the world with Indigenous people. It's not just North America, you know, it's all over the world. So I just want to thank everyone and acknowledge the Creator for helping and assisting us in this process of teaching. Thank you.
Thank you to our dear panelists for their introductions of what they're going to be touching on, because that's been mentioned already, that we're just taking some very first steps, and many of you have been on this journey for a while and together. So it's a great day. I'm going to turn it over now to Tara, who's going to moderate the rest of the presentation. So we'll be doing that together as best we can. We talked about using the reactions on the bottom, so raising your virtual hand or your hand, because we have to scan the screens and we have multiple pages. So Tara and I will be tag teaming together for reading, and I apologize if I'm looking down. I'll be reading some of the words and questions. We will try and elicit questions from the chat and also from the raised hands as our speakers now dive into the content of our presentation. I'll turn this over to Tara now.
Hi, everybody. So thank you, Michelle. I've got internet difficulties today, so I'm going to leave my screen off. But like Michelle said, we're going to entertain questions now. So if you have a question, please let us know. And I believe also John wanted to have a opportunity to share his screen.
Thank you, Tara. Actually, I just wanted to point out some things that, oops, wrong thing. Wait a second. Okay, so am I able to share now? Okay, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Ben, can he share his screen now?
Okay, I'll try again. Okay, now that's fine.
John, you're co-host now, you can share.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nilüfer.
Thank you. So can you see what I'm sharing here?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, good. So this is the document, I said companion document for the presentation, Abdu'l-Baha's Prophecy, American Indian Ways of Thinking and Being as a Form of Holistic Illumination. And in this particular document, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context for the discussion today very quickly. I'm just going to go through some of the subheadings: Machine, Man, and the Despiritualized Mechanical Universe. That's one heading, which I talk about Descartes, Newton, Locke, Smith, and so forth. Then the quantum physics, Baha'i and American view of oneness and holism. And in this particular subheading, I talk about how many of the findings in quantum physics are validating the idea that we do indeed live in an interconnected, interrelated cosmos, right, that includes the unity of the material and spiritual aspects of reality, that the physical is just one aspect of reality, and indeed it's not even the most important part of reality, that it's just a projection or manifestation of a more true, deeper form of reality. And this is something that native shaman and medicine people, women and men, mystics knew from many centuries ago. So in that particular subheading I talk about, and obviously in the first book called Faith, Physics, and Psychology, I cover much of this in detail. Then the other one, American Indian socioeconomic political relations and institutions, is a reflection of wholeness and holism. Here I cover how many of the institutions of Native peoples were derived from this idea of oneness, right, which is very much consistent with the Baha'i Faith. So as an example, you would think for yourself, but then act for others. Also, justice systems where you try to bring reconciliation and wholeness to a community. So if somebody offends, right, you try to bring that person back into balance with the rest of society. Those are examples. And also group decision-making processes. And in some cases, Native women, in many cases, I'd say had more democratic participation than any of the women in Europe at that time who were just treated as property of the men. Then I talk about here about the Ganawita's Great Law. This quote is incredibly powerful from the Ganawita. I'll just read the first part. He says, "I carry the mind of the master of life." And this is from the Ganawita. It's considered for the Haudenosaunee, he's considered a prophet, right? A mystical messenger of God, really. I carry the mind of the master of life, and my message will bring an end to wars between East and West. And he goes on and describes how righteousness means justice practiced between men and between nation. It means also desire to see justice prevail, right? A desire to see justice prevail. Health means soundness of mind and body. It also means peace, for that is what comes when minds are sane and bodies cared for. Power means authority, the authority of law and custom, backed by such force as is necessary to make justice prevail. It also means religion, for justice enforced is the will of the holder of the heavens and his sanction. And then he goes on and talks about thinking shall replace killing, and there shall be one commonwealth. So there's many prophecies, writings that talk about this time to come, and they were able to unite for centuries 5 Indian nations into one. So I'll move on. I don't want to take up too much more time. Materialism, a devouring flame, right? Shoghi Effendi talks about materialism being a devouring flame, the chief factor in precipitating the dire ordeals and world-shaking crises, right? And there I talk about how this worldview materialism, right, keeps us in physical consciousness instead of thinking of a holistic view of reality, right, where we see the sacredness and the secular together, where we see spiritual and matter, mind, body, spirit all together as one. So here's a quote from the Century of Light, right, which is very important. Capitalism, a Cartesian, Newtonian, notice I say instead of social science, I say an anti-social science, which I believe it to be the case. And right, Shoghi Effendi, he said, that capitalism and communism, he says, quote, two antagonistic schools of thought, which, however divergent in their ideologies, are to be commonly condemned by the upholders of the standard of the faith of Baha'u'llah for their materialistic philosophies and their neglect of their spiritual values and eternal verities, on which alone a stable and flourishing civilization can be ultimately established. So anyhow, I'm not gonna, I'm already taking too much time. I'm just trying to give you a little bit. I also talk about prophecies and so forth, but that gives you a little bit of an idea. Thank you so much for allowing me to share, and I will stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, John. You've got us thinking more and more, and appreciate you offering this article as well to go along with today's discussion. I've got some hands and we've got some questions in the chat. So I'm going to ask Coral to go ahead. You were first, and then I'll ask Miriam after her. So Coral, go ahead.
I wanted to comment on what Mr. Kahn said. My parents right now are on the way to Nabi, about in a week, just to visit. They were pioneers for 7 years on Shiprock, and that's the Navajo Nation. And they were married in Crow Creek, and where I came into being. And my mom worked at Red Lake and Panema, and my dad lived on the White Earth Reservation for 3 years. And I always think about, how do they get the trust? How do they get the trust so easily? And the trust of the indigenous people. After I wrote a thesis on the what happened with the boarding school and the religion and cultures being destroyed and everything. I wrote a thesis on all of that. And so I said, I always often just wonder, how did they get the trust? And I honestly think it was they connected to their dreams. And so I grew up, constantly dreaming about the reservation and thinking it was completely normal for people to explore their culture and spiritual ways. And we talked about Dagana Wida. We talked about white buffalo calf woman at home. We talked about the medicine wheel. So that's how I grew up. And now I'm confused because I didn't know that people saw it another way.
Great, thanks, Coral. I'll ask any of the panel members who'd like to respond to that. Alfred, John, Jeff, Athena?
I'll respond. I really appreciate the question. I think it's a very profound question, a lot of layers to it. I can just speak from my experience because I heard the stories from my uncles. And, Nabi, I'll share very briefly that there's a very good document Linda Covey put together, along with Joyce Olinga about the 1962 Council Fire. And there were some Navajos before my uncles that became Baha'is, but my uncles, went through the boarding school process, and they were beaten for speaking their language, and told that our traditional beliefs were evil. And then they went out to, they went through the whole boarding school process. They were taken from my grandparents who didn't speak any English, and they were taken out to the boarding schools. And then when they finished the boarding school process, exiting high school level, they were, basically positioned in Nevada to live a Caucasian life. And one of the stipulations was that they were just told to go choose a church. And they didn't want to choose the Catholic Church because they didn't agree with the way that they were treated. And they found a lot of the reasons were because of the Catholic people who were involved with that. They investigated other religions and weren't very interested. But then they met a couple of ladies, and these ladies, talked to them and said, "You're Native American, are you Indigenous?" They said, "Yes, we are." And they said, "Well, tell me about your culture and your language." And they said, "Well, we don't know. We weren't taught. And they said, "Well, you should go learn." And then my uncles, asked, "Well, what religion are you?" And they said, "Well, we're Baha'is." And that was the way they were introduced to the Baha'i Faith. And individually, they both accepted the Baha'i Faith separately. And but before they became Baha'is, and decided to declare, they went back to our tribal land, our Navajo Nation, went back home to my grandparents who didn't speak any English, and asked them, there's this Baha'i religion, and they believe in the equality of women and men. They believe that all people come from the same human family, that all divine teachings come from the same source. And they believe that science and religion agree. And they had to translate all of this into Navajo because my grandparents didn't speak English. And they said, "Well, can we be Baha'i?" And because they wanted to ask permission from my grandparents first before they became Baha'i. And my grandparents said, "Yes, you can be Baha'i. This is a continuation of our beliefs." And I think you're right when you say dreams, because we were prepared. We have our own prophecies, like you mentioned, the white buffalo calf woman in the Navajo culture. We have prophecies of the hero twins, twin manifestations who are prophesied to come from the east and bring the healing message for a time when we would be afflicted by great calamities. And I can talk about that, if people want to hear about it. But I think you're right, is that, I think these being Indigenous and understanding these teachings, it's sometimes difficult to have these conversations because we come from such different mindsets, as John, eloquently shares, is these mindsets of materialism and the spiritual basis of mindset, I think, is very challenging. So how did we trust? I think that story maybe shows you a little bit of where the trust started, and then the trust was violated, and I'm a continuation of this process that it wasn't a fairy tale ending after they became Baha'is, because they did this 1962 council fire and hundreds of Navajos became Baha'is during that council fire. And it's not an exaggeration. There's a list and names of people who declared their faith in Baha'u'llah. When my uncles brought it to the tribe, they had an open invitation to all the tribal leaders. And, there were Universal House of Justice members and Hand of the Cause there sharing about the Baha'i Faith on the Navajo Nation. And then, Nabi really started by my uncles and the community asking for a place. And it's the only, as I understand, it's the only institute in the lower 48 of the United States, the only institute that was originated from the community's generation. The community generated the need for the institute to be created, and it was created. All the other institute, Bosch, Lou Helen, they were all created by the National Spiritual or a higher administration or institution created it for that community. And the Native American Baha'i Institute was the only one so far that's been created by the community, out of the community's need. And, I could go into the stories of some of the hardships because the trust was violated as well. And it took my whole lifetime to heal some of those challenges. And, but there will be challenges. And I think it's an ongoing process, to build trust and to keep it. And it's one of the reasons I asked Jeff Kiely to be here, because he's been a pioneer for 45 years. And that in itself should tell you something about the trust that was established through individuals and through mentorship and through friendships and relationships that struggle and endure challenges and hardship. I hope I answered it a little bit. Anybody else on the panel, if you want to add, please.
Thank you, Alfred. I've got another hand here, Mariam. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, it's kind of related to what you guys were just talking about, but I was just thinking, like, it's really, frankly, horrific the way the treatment of Indigenous communities has, and I think that a lot of non-Indigenous Baha'is aren't even fully aware of that injustice, and yet we want to come into these communities and teach and not aware of, like, all of the murders that have happened in the residential schools and all of these things. And so I think, firstly is, what is the role of non-Indigenous people when they want to enter these communities, and should they even do that, given that there's all these patterns of paternalism and privilege and things like that? And then how to be respectful and preserve the diversity and have it, be a place where it's an empowering place. And and the other thing is what I was thinking, I grew up in Latin America, and just like what about like kind of the communities within the Latino community and Indigenous community where there's like a lot of shared roots and stuff, and how that could be possibly a gateway and of communities to come together, because there's so many in the Latino community, there's so much indigenous roots too, and that and they were some of the first people to help within the border crisis and things like that. So I think how to like bridge those gaps and create that community without having all these without creating education and ridding people of paternalism and things like that.
Great, thank you, Mariam. I think Jeff is going to respond to that from our panel. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you very much, Marianne. from the perspective of someone who came to this land as a non-Indigenous Baha'i, I can reflect on a couple of things. In 1975, the Hand of the Cause, Dr. Mohajer, visited Navajo land. And one of the pioneers in the audience asked him or said, you know, it's very difficult teaching the faith here. What suggestions do you have for us? And Dr. Mohajer responded very simply. He said, you walk with them. You walk with them. They are on a journey. So become a companion on their journey. Become their true friend. Listen to them. Learn from them. Cry with them. Celebrate with them. But just walk with them. And as you walk with them, you will come to know what to do. You will know when to respond. But mostly listen and learn. And that has stayed with me for a long time. Another thing that I'm reflecting on is that among the indigenous people that I have been with, both in East Africa and here in North America, the concept of relationship is incredibly important. You heard John speak of just the cosmology of indigenous people, about the unity of the worlds and the integration of their life. In the Navajo way, there's a principle called k'e, and k'e means relationshipness. I mean, that's one of the definitions. It has to do with clan relations, but it also has to do with the relationship of the human being to all aspects of the universe. And within that cosmology, you come to understand that relationships are everything. So when teachers of school teachers come from Indiana or Michigan or California and come to work among the Navajo children, the ones who are successful are the ones who know how to establish relationship. And the ones who are not successful are the ones that have expectations about how the children should respond to them and are not open to learning about the community. So I think is an extremely important thing. So what I would say is that one approaches the task of pioneering among indigenous people with tremendous respect and care. And you come first to listen, and then you come to accompany. And as those who come to trust you begin to ask for your assistance, you offer from your own life and your own experience what you can. So that's a very simple response, but I thought I would share that.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I think Athena wants to share as well on this topic. And then I do see I have raised hands by Dean, Veronica, and Morella, so I haven't forgotten you. So Athena, go ahead.
Yeah, I always remember the bell curve, you know, and it's just the human nature for whatever culture. You're going to have people who are very receptive right off the bat, and then people who are very distrustful, suspicious, hostile, and then the majority of the folks will be in the middle. And they're going to take some time, and that friendship will have to develop. And so it starts with just showing up, like Jeff said, and that's what I found in Isleta was I came across a family. They weren't working. They were staying at home all day, pretty much bored out of their mind. So when I said, can we do a book one? They're like, sure, absolutely. They jumped on it. They wanted that book one every day. And the same thing with mothers who were staying at home. Let's study book 3 and what's the importance of that children's classes. It was very easy. And so it's just remembering that bell curve and relying on prayer. And I'm really happy that we brought up the topic of dreams, because my mother from Isleta Pueblo became a Baha'i because of a dream. She dreamt that the Bab visited her. And Jacqueline Left Hand Bull, that's how their families became Baha'is, is because of a vision of the Bab. And so I think that our reliance on prayer, begging Baha'u'llah to bring the receptive souls to us, begging him to tell us what's the next path, who should we approach, how to do it, and then trusting that that some folks out there have had these dreams and are waiting. Or they're just waiting, even if they didn't have a dream, they're waiting for that friendship and waiting for that, the prayers and the message of Baha'u'llah.
Great, thank you, Athena. Dean, thank you for your patience. Go ahead, Dean.
Thank you very much. John, I really enjoy your work. My perception is that faith, physics, and psychology is sort of the repository of your work, but that's now a number of years ago. Are there updates? Are there ideas that you have now that either have changed or that expand upon that you could comment on briefly or keep some of us up to date?
Thank you. That's very gracious of you. And I continue to write. I'm not sure if what I'm writing will take the shape of a book, maybe a book of essays on various topics. I do maintain an interest in quantum physics. I maintain correspondence with a friend of mine who we discuss. And I think that many of the things that have happened in the years since I wrote that book have actually confirmed many of the things that I was talking about in those books. And I think that even some of these revelations, which kind of the revelations coming out of Canada, it's something that people knew that there was a sense of knowing, right? What was happening in Canada in terms of the residential schools. We know that the Truth and Reconciliation Committee out of Canada, they declared that there was an actual campaign of cultural genocide that was being committed for many decades against the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And of course, since then, we've also discovered, as many of you know here, when they went to Kamloops, the residential school run by the state of Canada, along with, I believe, the Catholic Church. Some of these residential schools were run by Christian and Catholic people, along with the state. And in the Kamloops, as many of you are aware, they found the remains of Native children that had been just basically put into these holes without any ceremony. So there goes the first language again. There's, to answer your question, there's just many things that many ways that I can talk about what I spoke about in psychology. As we know, there's in all these areas we talk about people coming into contact again with a more holistic view of reality. How are we able to bring science and religion together, spiritual and material, the sacred and the secular? How are we able to bring mind, body, and spirit together, the oneness of humanity? People are becoming very interested in all fields of endeavor. And that's what I try to cover, including in education, in physics, in psychology, also historical ways of viewing things. So just one thing I wanted to add to what has already been stated is I really recommend Alfred's article. Alfred did a beautiful job in describing in a very real way the challenges that Native peoples are facing, Indigenous communities are facing. We need to really understand that after centuries of abuse, right, these children, as an example, and he described his own experience of his extended family and so forth in these boarding schools. It was a campaign to strip Native peoples of their language, of their culture, of their spiritual traditions, of separating them from their family system, which is one of the most important things that Native peoples had. That was a richness that they had, okay? And to colonize their minds with all these ideas that I talk about in my books. So now Native peoples are talking about becoming decolonized reconnecting with those things that they lost in the past. And maybe a part of that is for me has also been a journey of also trying to reconnect. Because I know there's been tremendous shame in even being Native is a shameful thing. Some people don't understand that, right? And Alfred did a great job of being very real in terms of, does it surprise us, the suicide rate, the substance abuse rates, the extreme poverty that we see in Native communities today? And you can trace it to this campaign of stripping people. There's one thing if you can face poverty and physical conditions, but you're still spiritually strong to face those things. It's another entirely when you have been destabilized, where you no longer have those spiritual traditions. Your networks of family that you once had. Some cases, some children came back from the boarding school, they couldn't even communicate with their grandparents, with their parents anymore. Anyhow, I've spoken enough, but yes, to answer your question, I know I went all the way around, is yes, I continue to write, and I hope maybe something will come through as a third book, but I thank you so much for your graciousness.
Thank you, John. We're going to keep going. I mentioned at the beginning of the call that we might take a break, but I'm feeling that we're on a roll here. We're going to keep going. So if you need to stand up and stretch, go ahead and do that. I'm going to ask Michelle, who's monitoring the chat right now, to maybe give us a question from there. And then next on my list is Veronica, Morella, Christopher, and then I did see you, Sandy. Nice to see you, Sandy. So Michelle, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I think I'll just touch on the themes. And first of all, we want to acknowledge all of the heartfelt contemplation and thought that is going into the questions, because frankly, that is why we're here today. And we are doing this from a new technology standpoint. We will not be able to ask all of the questions in the chat. However, your input and participation is something that all of the other participants are going to see as well. And we want to acknowledge and honor that, because we are talking about things that require contemplation and thought. The major themes coming up from the questions are about trust. How do we build trust? What does it look like? When we're doing Ruhi books, how do we do it from something other than a Christian-like stance, which also brings in the concept of paternalism and how we as Baha'is are walking within that world. So I was just wanting to share some themes. Please continue to put that in, because some of our other hand that have come up are touching on those questions. So one of the main things is, how do we approach the Ruhi teachings and teachings sort of from a more inclusive perspective and not be sort of perceived or come off as Christian-like in our sharing of a new message. So those were some of the major themes from the chat so far.
Any of the panelists who want to address that? Tina, go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to comment on the thing about not feeling comfortable using the Ruhi material. So what Nabi, there was a feeling similar to that at Nabi, that folks wouldn't be ready for book one in particular. And so they developed 3 or 4 topics, one called, it's centered on the Navajo teaching of walking in beauty. And so one is called Hope in the Family, Hope in the Community, Faith in the Community, and it uses the same pedagogy as our Institute process. And it tries to bring families together to talk about these topics. And one of the quotes that I love so much from these sessions was a quote, I think of Abdu'l Baha, where he says, look how when a family works together, how strong and how blessed they are. I'm going to look for it and read it before we end today. But that's when my vision when I'm working with Indigenous communities, and it's the prophecy that John talks about too, and of course in his video, is that it's all built on getting folks to think about how strong and how wonderful our future will be when we start working together. And so we could figure out how to make that material available. I don't know if Nabi has more recent versions, because of course, as they keep using it, they tweak it a little bit, but those are really easy to use kind of workbooks.
Great. Thank you, Athena. Any other comments before I go on to the next person? Jeff, John, or Alfred?
I'm trying to raise my hand. I'll just raise it physically. The question of trust, I think, goes along with the idea of the capacity for institutions and individuals and the community to allow for mistakes, because I think with these generational traumas, it's difficult for Indigenous communities to be able to trust, and then to build that trust. I think it's a healing process that, I think it was shared that healing is a fundamental, and I think we all agree that healing has to take place from all of our tribes, because a lot of times people don't know that they need to heal when you're Indigenous. Sometimes I think I wanted to mention that when I like the word Indigenous because it's inclusive. I think I consider the Latino, Latinx community, the Mexican community that's our neighbor, was incorporated into our Navajo tribe, and we didn't make a distinction that, oh, you're Mexican, therefore you can't be Navajo. Actually, there's a whole clan of Navajo that is the Mexican clan. The Nakai is the Mexican clan. And so, and today when I meet Mexicans, they don't know they're Indigenous, a lot of them. And that's created because, so we need to take a lot of steps. It's a process, is basically maybe what I would share from my experience. And maybe one of the first steps in that process is just acknowledgement of where we're at right now, because when I talk to some Hispanic or Mexican individuals, for them, indigena is an insult. If you want to insult somebody, you say indigena, and that is Indigenous in Spanish. And that's still fundamentally embedded in the culture and pervasive. You can go to any Mexican schoolyard and hear someone call someone indigena. You knock something over, que indigena. And so, but then when I went down to Mexico and I spent time with them, they're like, wow, you're Native American. That's awesome. I wish I was a Native American. I love Dances with Wolves, and I'm just boggled by this whole situation we're in, because, from my tribe has a whole process of healing and challenges that we've gone through. And I'm multi-tribal as well. I don't even have a connection really with my Cherokee and Osage except through my mom and my grandma. And, I'm not connected with that family. And so I think I don't want to go on too long with this, but essentially what I want to try and share is that this idea of trust and this idea of healing, it goes along with an understanding of where we're at, and an honest, and I really appreciate ABS and everyone who's here, who's a scholar, who's understanding that what the history we're taught is not the real history. And it takes accompaniment for Indigenous youth to really find out what their true history is. And it could be a powerful service to take that first step, to go to journey with them and to ask that question that my uncles were asked, what is your culture? Who are you? Tell me about your Indigenous identity. That's a powerful first question. And it's a powerful basis for a relationship with any Indigenous youth and junior youth. Because right now that process for all of us is a challenging one, and it's an uphill battle, and some are losing those elders and losing the resources where they could answer those questions. This is a very powerful time, and I really appreciate all the questions that you're sharing, because 10 years from now, a generation from now, they won't have the resources we have right now. There's elders in your communities that you're working with, or that you could go work with, that could share stories that are going to be lost, because you can't possibly capture all those stories. And these youth aren't trained how to appreciate the oral tradition. They're not trained how to learn about their Indigenous identity. And I believe Baha'is are well trained to do that, because how do you learn about the Baha'i Faith? You read the Dawnbreakers, you read God Passes By, along with the writings from Baha'u'llah. They're like two pillars. The oral tradition is there in the Baha'i Faith. So if you're deep in Baha'i, you've trained yourself how to learn about oral tradition. Or if you're not a deep in Baha'i, then deepen yourself. Read Dawnbreakers, read God Passes By, because then you'll be prepared to go and have these conversations and understand where your oral tradition, where your tradition comes from as Baha'i is the Dawnbreakers, where your tradition comes from as a Baha'i in the oral, through this oral way. Why was Nabil and Shoghi Effendi chose to encapsulate, the early stories of the faith? We learn so much from the stories, and if you could just impart a little bit of that enthusiasm or wonderment or exploration with any junior youth or youth in any indigenous community, they would be so captivated to learn from their elders. And that's the decolonization, like the catchphrase people like to use, but really what it is it's a reconnection back to who we are, as a growing traditional people. It's a process.
Thank you, Alfred. I think Jeff wanted to contribute to this topic, and then I'll move on to Veronica. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Tara. I wanted to, first of all, I really appreciate Alfred's perspective. It's very a very important way of understanding these things. And certainly, of course, Athena. In my view, I'd like to go back to the teaching of unity and diversity and speak to the fact that many of the indigenous people we would be living and working and among and learning together with, they have a very diverse, they are diverse, and they have diverse learning styles. And for many of them, sitting down and reading from a book is not the primary way that they learn or interact with ideas. And it can become timely for some of them to engage the Ruhi materials and methods. But in the beginning, it might be through storytelling and talking circles and prayers and songs and the sharing of traditions. Maybe doing a round dance together and those kinds of social experiences. That might be where the initial learning comes from. So I think that there are many approaches and styles that can be used, and the Ruhi materials and methods are one of our, training sources for helping the people to learn the faith and to grow as a community. I wanted to just very briefly share that about 35 years ago, when my wife and I were administrators at Nabi, the Ruhi process first came to the United States, to the Lewis Gregory Institute and to Nabi, to introduce it to these indigenous institutes and to see what we thought about it. So we shared that introduction with many of the Navajo friends and asked them how they liked it. And they said they loved it, but they said, could we begin not with these materials, but could we begin by sitting down together and translating the Baha'i writings into Navajo, because we spent most of our time trying to understand the words and arguing over the meanings of the words in English. And so they said, could we do, and so our first response then was to have a Navajo translation committee. And we developed many, many translations of the Baha'i writings into Navajo. And that was not only produced a product, which was these translated writings, but it was the most inspiring, exciting, deepening process that any of us in that translation group have ever been a part of. So I think we need to keep in mind that in working with communities, whether they are Native American indigenous communities or other communities, that we need to be aware that there are many different ways that people learn and that communities come together to learn things. And then it's just a matter of finding the right timing for for introducing and utilizing the Ruhi materials for one example. I also see a question as to what Nabi means. For those who are not familiar, Nabi means Native American Baha'i Institute. It was an institute that was begun in the late 1970s and established at the southern edge of the Navajo Nation back about 40 years ago.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. That's very helpful, and thank you for explaining the acronym NABI. Veronica, thank you for your patience. You're next.
Hello, hi everybody. I was very excited about listening to all the reference to Latin America because that's where I'm from. I'm in Paraguay, and our history is very different. And Paraguay never lost. The culture was never wiped out. The whole country speaks Guarani and Spanish, so it's a very different paradigm that I'm coming from, and it's very exciting to live here. My question was the following. We know that each culture has values and even the vocabulary that is very useful and very different from different cultures and can convey deeper meanings and different concepts that don't exist somewhere else, right? Like in Quechua, for in Ecuador, in Quechua language, you have the idea of minga, you know, the whole complex idea of communal work for everybody's benefit, right? I was wondering if the panelists could like to share some examples of illustrations that could help us understand better the concept of individual, communities, and institutions, because the house is helping us understand this interrelationship, but a lot of the cultures, you know, have it's limited understanding of what this means, you know, what is institutions and what are the individuals and what are the communities. So maybe I was wondering if they could give us some explanation, illustrations on those concepts from the Native American perspective from North America.
Thank you, Veronica. John or Alfred?
It's a profound question. I don't think I can answer it without thinking back to some of the teachings that are in the Navajo ceremonies, you know, and I think John, in his video, he can speak to this, that you know, the American democracy was built off of the Iroquois Confederacy, those 5 nations that fundamentally understood, you know, these things, and a lot of our tribes understood a very similar process, that we, you know, the collective understanding and the collective good benefit from strong individuals, and that, you know, when we had these councils and you know, we really didn't have chiefs in a sense that we had, you know, this like we have now, what you hear chief, but we had these ways of governing ourselves through clanships, and it was really a balance between women and men, and in the Navajo culture, it's a matriarchal society. So when, you know, like for example, our family passes down our property and our grazing rights and our rights to the land through women, and you know, it's a difficult question to answer for me, because a lot of those Navajo teachings are in theory, but they've been destroyed through practice. You know, a lot of the ways we have been obliterated, and I've learned a lot from the indigenous people of South America, because like you said, you've been able to maintain for so long. I'm relearning a lot of my indigenous way. I don't even speak my Navajo language fully. I know a little bit, but I think, you know, I think it's a really important question. And I think we're, in a way, it's humbling to say, but I think it's true that as Navajo people, we are learning about ourselves through the Institute process, because we're this, you know, the universal of justice and Baha'u'llah has a remedy, and we're learning how to, you know, reincorporate those practices of the community, institution, and individual balance through our community, through the local spiritual assembly. And so in a way, these destructive forces have put us in a position where the best hope for us as Navajo people, I believe, is to embrace the Baha'i teachings and the Baha'i administrative order, because that's the closest thing. And like my grandparents said, that's the way, that's the next step. You know, we didn't, my grandparents were so potent in the they must have had a dream. You know, someone mentioned it, and I think they were spot on, but that's the only way I could say that for my grandparents to instantly say, this is a continuation of our Navajo teachings. This Baha'i faith is a continuation. And so it's a difficult way maybe to answer the question, but I believe that our Navajo people need the Baha'i faith because of the situation we're in, where we've lost our cultural way. We have an oppressive government system that's been placed upon us. We're a semi-sovereign Navajo entity, but it's a really hodgepodge of Western cultural, American cultural governing processes that have enforced on us, and our local people actually operate on a different level. They're like two separate realities trying to operate at the same time, and a lot of times they're conflicting. So our tribal chairperson is elected, but oftentimes has no connection to our community clan process of our individual families. And so we're learning a lot through the Institute process. And I think it's our only hope at this point, because we're in a desperate situation, and maybe we can learn from you. You know, you've maintained your cultural ways through time, and we, you know, as a Navajo person, I'm grateful to Colombia and the indigenous population that was there, part of the Ruhi process. You know, that is where we are learning from as Navajo people as well, how to be indigenous from Colombians through this process. And I think the world is learning how to implement this indigenous process, even though some of them may not know it.
Great. Thank you, Alfred. And thank you, Veronica, for joining us from Paraguay. It's so awesome to have you here. I've got Mirella next on my list, and then Christopher, and then Sandy. So Mirella, thanks for your patience.
Oh, yes, thank you. And John and Alfred, thank you. John, you brought tears to my eyes, because the way I hear it from Alfred speaking, it almost not breaks my heart, but I come from a totally different culture as well. And I look at the American society, and I do not consider it as a culture. Unfortunately, personally, when I came here, I was threatened that I would be deported by my ex-husband had I spoke to my daughter in the native language, which was my maternal tongue, Romanian. And so I was afraid, and to be accepted by this society, I literally stopped. And so I was afraid. And so I think language is very important. And in the Baha'i community, I noticed that I, as a foreigner, am not encouraged to speak it, to say prayers in other languages. I speak three. I'm close to French as well, but I don't consider myself as so nationalistic or anything. I just consider that courtesy, and I look at the quote that Abdul Baha, it's in the tablet of Baha'u'llah, and it says, "O people of God, I admonish you to observe courtesy, for above all else is the Prince of Virtues. Well it is with him who is illumined with the light of courtesy and is attired with a vesture of uprightness. Who is endued with courtesy has indeed attained a sublime station. It is hoped that this wronged one and everyone else may be enabled to acquire it, hold fast unto it, observe it, and fix our gaze upon it. This is a abiding command which has streamed forth from the pen of the most great name." So here Baha'u'llah is even asking and saying, it's hoped that this wrong one and everybody else may be enabled to acquire it. So to me, that means that we have a way to learn about courtesy, but what is courtesy? Courtesy is part of establishing and maintaining relationships, in my opinion. To relate, it means to respect, to maintain, to help, to be of service, to be there, to be present. And so in terms of courtesy, that is very relative, because if you consider courtesy in, let's say, Persian culture is to cross your arms when the prayers are done. My daughter was admonished in the Baha'i community for not crossing and not being, what do you call it, respectful or whatever. Whereas in my culture, in the Romanian culture, crossing your arms, it's very offensive. You cannot do that. You offend and the person stops talking to you and thinks of you that you don't care about them. And so it takes a lot of observation and a lot of ego left behind and ourselves left behind in terms of being present for this incredible culture that the indigenous people have. And it almost hurt to say that, I mean, for me, I don't see a culture. The American society is not per se a culture, is a multitude of everything, a hodgepodge of everything. So I just consider, I had friends from Washington, from like, I forgot, it's in Florida, Seminole. And I love to hear their stories, and I would record them. And they love to talk. They love to tell stories. It's important to know who they are, because if we talk at them, then that's not an establishing a relationship, in my opinion. So it takes a lot of love, humility in, again, before we even, I mean, I don't say that you can jump in a Ruhi book one, but jumping in a Ruhi book one without establishing and seeing and cooking together and maybe, you know, singing together, dancing together, going, participating in their activities. I think as Baha'is, we need to look at a much more wholesome way when we talk about, and I make air quotes here, establishing relationships, because it's a very, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of compassion. And the shame has to be left behind, and empathy.
Thank you. John, did you want to contribute there?
Thank you so much for expressing your heart. That was very beautiful. And what I would say is that what we are experiencing today is the establishment of what the Universal House of Justice, through the book, they commissioned it. It's a commissioned book. It's The Century of Light. What they describe as a system of thought that reigns unchallenged across the planet. And then they mention some of the things, right, that it's the result of this system of thought. And they describe it as Western civilization, nominally described as Western civilization. And they mention some of the features of it, right, as the voice, it says materialism, that I'm paraphrasing now, I have the quote in the article, that I'm going to use the word pretends to be the voice of science, right? So Shoghi Effendi, as I mentioned earlier, right, he described materialism, we tend to reduce it to just consumerism. Consumerism and commercialism are just symptoms of the disease of materialism. Materialism at its core is the belief that this physical world is true reality. And Native peoples, at least I would say traditionally raised Native peoples, understood that this is just one aspect of reality that's not even the most important part of reality, that in fact it is through dreams, through the shamanic arts, through mystical prayer, through meditation, through other forms of that you can contact that deeper reality. And so we live, whether we're indigenous or you mentioned Romania, I'm sure Shoghi Effendi mentions very clearly that this cancerous materialism, it it was born, he says, born in Europe, right? And then it was greatly, what's the word I'm looking? It was multiplied, or it was, what's the word I'm looking for? It was expanded, greatly expanded, I'm paraphrasing, in North America. And now then it spread through Asia, Africa, and through many other places. And definitely Native peoples were impacted by that as well. Whether we live in South America, Central America, Mexico, Canada, the United States, wherever we are, we're being impacted by that Western view mentality, right, that emphasizes the material over the spiritual. It does not emphasize a holistic view of reality in which we understand that health comes from a mind-body-spirit connection. Also, it emphasizes rugged individualism, competition, a profit motivation rather than a service orientation. And materialism itself is when, if we identify this physical world as true reality, and if we emphasize that who we are is our body, right, then it makes logical sense that we will spend most of our time, our effort, and our goals pursuing these physical things, right? So the pursuit of physical wealth, power, and status. And that's what we're facing, whether it's in indigenous communities, whether throughout the world, right? A system of thought that reigns virtually unchallenged throughout the planet. That's what they talk about. And that same cancerous materialism. I'll just say one last thing. It's also, it leaves us trapped in ego consciousness, right? The ego is the belief that who we are is our body, who we are the things that we own, who we are is our careers, our jobs, who we are is what other people think of us, right? Our recognition, our approval, and so forth, our rewards and so forth. That's who we are. And our writings, whether it's indigenous or the Baha'i Faith now, are telling us that we are much more than any of those things, right? That first and foremost, we are spiritual entities, souls that have been placed in this physical reality to learn lessons and to develop oneself. And I would agree with our panelists in saying that for now, what we need to look forward to, and this is indigenous communities as well, I would say, is that there is no alternative to Western civilization. There is no healthy alternative that we can turn to right now and say that's who we should emulate, including indigenous cultures. As Alfred said, much of that has been decimated. Okay, we're trying to reconnect as it is. And what I would say is the writings, the Baha'i writings tell us that the refuge, right, that we seek is in the creation of an entirely new civilization, an entirely new race of people that will truly understand oneness. And what I would say for Native peoples, how do you reconnect them is we start showing the connections between the Baha'i Faith and what maybe some of the traditions spoke about and some of the ancient prophecies spoke about is this idea of holism, integration, an ecological web of life type of worldview. Now, in similar way to the French, the Germans, the English, the Spanish, they come from many diverse, they have different languages, they come from different customs and so forth, but they share a common Western worldview, while traditional Native peoples from South America, Central America, all the way through North America, even though they had different foods, different languages, different stories and so forth, different ceremonies, they shared an overarching common holistic worldview. And that's what Native peoples need to reconnect to. And how do we do it? It is, in my belief, in my estimation, it is through the Baha'i writings that can reconnect us to oneness and what it truly means. And it's through the covenant, which tells us, the covenant tells us it's the axis of the oneness of humanity. Anyhow, I've said enough. Thank you so much, Mirella, for your beauty in expressing yourself.
Thank you, John. Alfred, I saw your hand there. Did you want to contribute to this piece here? And then I'll move on to Christopher now.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you very much, because I think the question highlights something that you immediately face as you walk into Indigenous communities, Baha'is in Indigenous communities. It's a beautiful question. Thank you. Because I think we've all experienced it. If you've had any experience if you've visited Nabi, if you've gone to a tribal land, and then among a lot of cultures, there's this idea of the what is considered, courteous, what is considered culturally appropriate. And I would say that enthusiastically that there is an opportunity for the Indigenous people to grow here, because it's a challenge that, and I think I don't expect the Western culture to change very much. It changes through us, but they aren't really going to be the ones to allow our culture to be fully represented. Inherent in Western culture is this idea of spreading, and someone once said to me, I love your, they were talking to someone else. They said, I love your accent. And they said, I wish I had an accent. And it's funny because people have also said, I love your culture. I wish I had a culture. And I would say that everyone has a culture and everyone has an accent. Even though Western culture is pervasive, it's hard to see. I'm gonna bring up a couple of things just as an example. If you've ever been in America, you've probably been to a birthday party. You've probably seen people blow out candles to give gifts to the person whose birthday it is. Christmas is part of the American culture. I would say Santa Claus is the American saint. So, this idea that Americans don't have a culture, going to the mall, shopping, Amazon, it's a culture that's spread through the whole world, and it's insidious because it's so ever present that you don't realize that it's a culture. Indigenous people who've never experienced very much of American culture come here and they see very clearly the ways we do things, and it's down to everything. And I've been raised in a hybrid way where American culture is part of my life, and it's fun for me to find those things where I hear the accent by listening to myself through it. I hear the culture through seeing through others' eyes. And what I just want to share really briefly that I'm very excited that I'm hearing these kind of questions, because I think the Romanian, the Romanian culture is a culture to me. And I have friends here in Albuquerque who are Romanian who have had challenges of being able to express their Romanian culture, and I've been encouraging and supportive. And I think just step one for me, from my experience, was to just have this fundamental question. First of all, what is a culture? What is my culture? And oftentimes that the person with the culture is the one who has to be forbearing and forgiving of mistakes. So when someone is being insensitive to your culture, I think what I've learned is that it's our responsibility and it's our opportunity to grow, to be forbearing and to be courteous to the people who are insulting to us, who are oftentimes Baha'is. There's nothing saying that Baha'i culture or the Baha'is in whatever culture they come from that are non-Indigenous are going to be nice to us or they're going to be perfect. They're not. And I think it's our responsibility to allow for mistakes, accept mistakes, because what our opportunity to grow is to learn our culture so well and learn their culture, and then find the ways to bring these things up and just say, oh, it's really nice that you want to teach my child to fold their arms. I'd like to teach you from my Baha'i culture that it is, this is how we say prayers, and this is what I'd like to share. And if they're not accepting of that, I think it takes a relationship. I think it takes time, but it's a difficult reality that I think is part of the reason why it's slow process of growth in Indigenous communities, because of the story you shared. And I really appreciate the story you shared. Just the simple idea of understanding, that first step, like I mentioned, of do you even know what the cultural context that you come from, that you understand? Do you understand the cultural context of the people around you? Learn about it. once you've learned about it, how do you express it to the people around you so that they can learn how to be courteous to you and grow together? You know, Persians have to learn that in American culture. You know, oftentimes there's communities that ask for feast letters to be read in Persian and English, you know, and feast letters are being read in English and Spanish here in some communities as well. So, and there's a translation period around Nabi and indigenous communities for it to be translated to their indigenous language. I think it's an important question, and I just want to say thank you for that.
Athena, I think you wanted to contribute to something to this topic. Go ahead.
Well, just a comment in the chat about Abdu'l-Baha describing indigenous people as savages. And this book, The Heart of Everything That Is, if I remember it right, I think it does go into a little bit of history about how savage a lot of Native warrior practices were. And so I always try to avoid generalizations because just in the United States alone, there were so many different tribes, so very diverse. And then Canada and the South and Central America. So we try to avoid generalizations, but I think that there are enough historical anecdotes that support what Abdu'l-Baha said about there being this crazy amount of savagery in the culture. And so even though there was this inherent spirituality and communion with the land, there also was this practice of one tribe, you know, trying to annihilate another tribe. And I think that by avoiding generalizations, we'll also avoid paternalism, because I think at the root of paternalism is a generalistic view that, oh, they're uneducated, they're poor. And if we start to not think in these general terms and we start to recognize, again, this bell curve, you're going to have very wealthy, very highly educated, influential indigenous people, and you're also going to have uneducated, very poor indigenous people and everything in between. So just wanted to point out that there is some historical viewpoints of that. And I also wanted to just read a line from the abstract of Alfred's paper that is something that I'm meditating on. I think that as time goes by, we all have to just keep thinking about it, because he says, Alfred shares his candid assessment of the prophetic promises in the Baha'i writings about Native Americans' potential to contribute greatly to the peoples of the world once they have reconciled their own traditional views and teachings with the global promises of Baha'u'llah. And so, you know, that's something that Native people will do on their own, and they're doing now. And Abdu'l-Baha said that a lot of the problem that we have is that people are holding to ancient, worn out traditions, like they're holding on to husks, and they're holding on to worn out garments that one day were beautiful and glorious, but now they're worn out and tattered. And so that's a process that Native people will go through, of reconciling their traditional beliefs with the promises and the teachings of Baha'u'llah.
Wow, beautifully said, Athena. Thank you so much. I also want to draw people's attention that the article by Alfred, of course, is now listed in your chat box there, so it's been linked in. And there's also a request at about 2:26. If you take a look at the chat, we've got the Baha'i Distribution Service from Australia on the call with us today. Michael Cohen has requested resources. So if you could take a look at his request, he listed it at 2:26 in the chat. Christopher, thank you for your patience. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Greetings from Wurundjeri territory, which is Aboriginal land in Melbourne, Australia. I want to acknowledge the elders that are present, the many elders, and the ancestors, that all of our ancestors are exchanging gifts and healing wounds as we are together here. And I want to acknowledge the four speakers, Athena, Jeff, John, Alfred, and that my spirit has been lifted many times listening to you, and my heart has been broken many times. I wanted to just two things briefly. So I'm a white person from diverse white backgrounds in Russia and other places. But I had the blessing of growing up on reservations and working with Indigenous peoples around the world. But I just wanted to share two facets of I guess you could say, like what Shoghi Effendi says as the most great challenge. And although that's framed with the Negro people, Black people, I just use that word because that was in the time, that I think similarly, the challenge he names for the white people of the oftentimes subconscious sense of superiority as our challenge. So being concerned about how do we get them? So if a white person is saying, how do I get Indigenous people to trust me, right? If I'm asking myself that question, it has more to do with how do I be trustworthy? And because it's not for me to worry about somebody else's path. So what does Shoghi Effendi asked for me? And so I think there's a really wonderful opportunity to, I think at first we have this fear of saying, well, I don't have a subconscious sense of superiority. I think Indigenous people are wonderful and I can help them, you know, and there's this kind of subconscious patronizing thing that creeps in, but we can actually have a joy of discovering these subconscious senses of superiority because we have many levels, right? I'm constantly discovering arrogance in myself towards people of color. Always, every day I find something that is there. And I've lived on reservations and I'm devoted to my life to service with Indigenous peoples, but I still find arrogance in my mind. But I do that joyfully, you know, and I think we can feel comfortable with that and say, oh, wow, I just found another arrogant thought, something, you know, inherited from my ancestral line that I can heal. It's this exciting kind of thing because I get to heal my ancestors as well as myself. And, you know, I think it's just something we can embrace with like just this joyfulness that I think, you know, we don't have to be scared about it. And the other thing, so that, you know, addressing that subconscious sense of superiority and owning all of us present have that. I mean, the people that are not of color, I mean, everybody has it, but in particularly speaking to the people who are maybe white or not Indigenous, we all have subconscious sense of superiority. And we have to be able to be comfortable with that and say how, and every day, you know, bring thyself to account. Each day ere thou art summoned to a reckoning, right? And so we have to do it on a daily basis, not just like, oh, I ticked that box. It's every day because it creeps up on us, right? And we start off doing something with good intent, then we get lots of praise and the ego kicks in. So, oh, it snuck up on me again. Okay, so there's that side. And then the second thing that I wanted to say was that intergenerational healing. So, you know, our ancestors participated in, benefited from colonization, right? Speaking as a white person, right? I have houses and, you know, income and things like that I benefited from my ancestors having been part of a colonial history, and I have better education and access to things. And so I profited from that. And my ancestors, whether intentionally or unintentionally, participated in that. And there's healing required for them. And it says in the writings, I remember I walked one time with Winifred Harvey, who, you know, was close with the Guardian, and I was working in the World Center, and I'm walking up the pathway of the Ark at 4 a.m. as a security guard, and, you know, holding the arm of this 84-year-old woman. And she's telling me the Guardian told me that forgiveness is not just the removal of sin, but is the transformation of it into a blessing. So when we pray for forgiveness, it transforms the sin into a blessing. And there's two ways that we can heal our ancestors. And one is to pray for them, and the other is to do actions of service in their name. And when I met Alfred, okay, so both of these things combined, I looked at him and I had these arrogant, hostile thoughts towards him. We met at the Gathering of Eagles some years ago, and I had been told by my Sundance chief, I just finished Sundance, and my Sundance chief had said, this place is not for direct teaching of the faith. We are just to be present and listen and serve. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. And then I saw Alfred I didn't see him the first 2 days, and then he showed up on the third day, and he was teaching to someone, and I was like, oh, who's this guy? He's, come up, and he's like, and then I was just having these really arrogant, mean thoughts towards him. And I felt my grandfather from the next world, who was on the House of Justice, Bora Cavalin, he reached out from the next world and he pinched my arm and he said, serve this man. And I was like, what? And so I just felt really humbled, and I was like, why? And then, so I went up to him, and we're standing next to this teepee, and then I quickly discovered this is his land. And I was like so mortified. And as we walked, I won't tell you the whole story, but basically, his ancestor, Franklin Kahn, and my grandfather were very present in our walking together. And there was things that happened with his ancestor that needed healing, that my grandfather needed us to walk together to heal. And so we can really joyfully embrace those moments of arrogance as moments of great transformation and change. And also the ability to honor our ancestors and allow for them to have the healing that they can only have when we walk together in that loving way. And I just also, last thing I wanted to say, almost everything I've learned about being Baha'i has been from various indigenous peoples from around the world. All the cultures that have been brought by manifestations of God, different manifestations of God, taught me everything I hold dearest about being Baha'i I've learned from indigenous people. And so around cultural diversity, it's not just about a token, everything's a different flower. There's this deep ability for us to go in and learn from indigenous peoples as our way of teaching. And that was it.
Thank you, Christopher. Appreciate that story and the history of your family as well as Alfred's ancestors. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to ask Sandy to, she's been waiting very patiently for almost more than an hour. So Sandy, go ahead, please.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Sandy. I'm here on Lekwungen territory in Victoria. You might be able to hear the trickster raven if he comes by. I'm born and raised here, but I have roots like Tara and Michelle in the Métis community in Manitoba. My husband and I, over 30 years ago, were directed, Christopher, you got me, we're directed to go to an Indian village, Namgis territory, and to establish relationships. I hope this will be in response to the question about how, because I know back then I was wondering, how do we do this? How do we connect hearts? So after many years of connection with the Namgis people, who are Kwakwakiwak, about 18 years ago, a group of young people, including our own children, and I think Kiely Russell, who's on here, I think is one of them, they decided after a youth conference, they were going to go up to that village, Alert Bay, and they were going to serve. They were going to do what Abdu'l Baha did. And they started a ball rolling that continues to this day. They went and served, and they just said, here are our hands. How can we help? It evolved in many ways. One very big way is that the Baha'is work in the kitchen at potlatches. And potlatches they're like courts, and they're like theater, and they're like churches, and they're everything to the Kwakwaka'wakw people, but they're huge. There are hundreds of people there. And what the Baha'i said is, let us come and butter the bread and make the sandwiches and cut the apples and prepare the tea so you can go and be in ceremony. And we've done that now for many years, and without asking anything in return. And the gracious hosts from those potlatches have welcomed us out on the floor, thanked us. And on more than one occasion, the chiefs have said, these are the people who came and they never asked for anything back. And they never came and said, here, we'll give you this, and then we want to give you something else. They just came and served. So by way of encouraging people, it's taken many, many years, but the relationships between the Baha'is and that nation are so deep. We're friends. We walk together. We cry together. We play soccer together. We were invited. The only non-native team, the Twin Arrows, plays in the First Nations Indigenous Soccer League. So I just wanted to share that, and then to say, if there's anyone among you who have ideas how we can now take it to the next level, because they have asked us, the band has asked us, and leaders of the community have said, please, we lose our young people. We lose them when they become young teenagers. And we know that the Baha'is who came up through Maxwell with workshop were such a good example. They said, please help us do that here. Bring us the junior youth program. And we have tried many which ways to make it happen. And there are Baha'is living there, but we haven't figured out a way to bring that to their community. And I don't know if people here have thoughts on how to do that, or if there's anyone among you that would like to help in that way. And I just to close, I really want to thank John Medina for your scholarly and passionate presentation earlier today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm gonna leave the last comments to Alfred and to John. And I'm sorry, friends, that we are running out of time now. So Alfred and then John, and then anything from Jeff and Athena, and then I'll close it off. Thank you.
I'm just so grateful for this sharing. And I think, you know, Abdul Baha is here with us, and Shoghi Effendi is here with us, you know, because this is the process that they started, and we're doing what needed to be done. You know, I think all these challenges I hear, they're going to be our strengths in these next upcoming generations if we keep trying, if we keep putting in the effort. I think, you know, I wanted to share something just very briefly that I don't know if many of you know, but the Navajo people were in, you know, destitute situation. And if you haven't heard of the Long Walk, you know, read about it, and then and then correlate the dates with the time when Baha'u'llah came out of his, came through his exile. What is the year that he came through his exile? What is the year that we went, Navajo people went on our exile? 1868, we arrived at Fort Sumner, and we were taken off of our tribal land, and we were forced marched. Many of our elders passed away on the march, hundreds of miles, drowned or were shot if they couldn't keep up. And if you're Navajo and you know the story, it's rightfully enraging. It's rightfully infuriating. It's rightfully unjust. Anger, there's a righteous anger, right, that you can feel when you know that our indigenous communities were treated so harshly and continue to be treated harshly. And we've gone through these struggles and these challenges. And I didn't know until I studied the Baha'i Faith that Baha'u'llah was on exile when we were in exile, when our tribal people were forced into these dire conditions. Baha'u'llah had no shoes and had to walk through the mountains, had no money, and had little children that he had to take care of. His family was forced through the mountains to Constantinople, Baghdad, Constantinople, Adrianople, and finally to Akka. When I got to read that history, the same time he said, "I've consented to be bound in chains that mankind may be set free," my tribe was literally set free. Could be hours, could be minutes that correlation happened within this world. And that is so invigorating to me, because I didn't know that we had the honor and privilege of suffering with Baha'u'llah at the same time. Have many of you ever thought of that? That our tribal people, our indigenous people suffered. So did Baha'u'llah. He was there suffering with us at the same time. And he accepted to be bound in chains so that we could go through this process, so that we could heal. We were fortunate as Navajo people, Dene, to have our land to not be taken away. I won't say given back to us, but I'll say they decided not to take it away. And we were very fortunate. Some tribes aren't so fortunate. And so I challenge every indigenous people to study the history of our indigenous people and to study the Baha'i Faith, because you will transform these atrocities and these traumas that we're still dealing with today, right now, these cultural genocides that we experience. We are not doing it we're going through it for a reason. There's a purpose to why we've suffered, why our tribal identities have been challenged, why we've endured atrocities. Baha'u'llah knew our sufferings, and he said, he consented to be bound in chains that mankind may be set free. Exact same time my tribal people were allowed to be returned home. And since that time, we've gone through hardships, boarding schools. We continue to go through cultural genocide right now people don't know about. And I think, I love this question about, this challenge that you're facing of starting junior youth groups. I'm just so encouraged when you look from where Baha'u'llah in this prison cell wrote those powerful words to where we are now, that the tribal people are asking for this healing remedy from Baha'u'llah to their lands, to our lands. And it's happening all over the world. It's happening in indigenous communities, in Lapland, in Norwegian, or in the Arctic Circle. It's happening in Mongolia. It's happening all over the world. It's really powerful. And it's just, I think what I want to share is this joy and enthusiasm that we can feel about the hardships we've gone through, because we can change them, transmute them into this relationship with Baha'u'llah and this power that he's given us to be able to not feel superior, but to feel blessed that we have been able to endure these challenges with Baha'u'llah. We inherit traumas and suffering not as a victim, but we inherit traumas as a victor over these spiritual battles that we're winning every day, And I'm just enthusiastic to hear that they're asking for the Junior Youth Program. I would say, ask them what are their indigenous ways of changing ceremonies, because almost all of our tribes had them. And I bet you most of them did, even if they're lost. And ask them, what is that process? And link it together with the Junior Youth Program. Because when you understand the indigenous culture, it's primed and ready to receive Baha'u'llah's message through this Junior Youth Program and through the Institute process. It's beautiful how they're linked together. It's there, we just need to look and find it. And we need to ask the elders, here's a simple question for a junior youth group. Bring the elders around and ask them, What was the old way where a child became a man, a child became a woman? What is that process? What were the values and teachings? Start there. Ask the question and listen. And then when you hear any animator who's going to be out there, listen to those teachings and then find a way to say, yes, these are all very powerful. We're going to incorporate them into our junior youth group. They're going to be the basis for how we serve the community, the basis for the ideas that we learn about or investigate as we go through. And you can be Indigenous, and to be Indigenous, like my grandparents said, is a continuation. Your continuation of being Indigenous is into the Baha'i Faith. And to be Indigenous now, I believe, you're going to find the strength that the potentials are going to be released through the Baha'i Faith. I want to correct something I also heard. I might be wrong, but I don't think Abdu'l-Baha ever called us savages. What he said is they may be likened to the savages of Arabian Peninsula. And I think that word savage is very loaded, and I might be wrong, but I do believe that if you can unload that savage word, what was he saying? He said that, remember that before Muhammad came, there's these tribal people who had very little in terms of spiritual and moral and physical, scientific progress. But within that time, they became so enlightened that they became the founders of algebra, of the sciences, of the chemistry, that all the things that we take for granted, the laptops, the technology, sprouted from that those tribal people. And that's, so let's not get hung up on the word savage from my perspective, but let's look at what he was saying. They were saying that this revelation is so powerful that it tapped into these potentials of these tribal people. There's a prophecy about that, and it's happening right now. And part of it is the institute process. I thanked the Indigenous people of Colombia, and I think that every person who's doing a junior youth group and a study circle and devotional gathering, the four core activities, should be thankful to the Indigenous people of Colombia, because that's where it came from. Did you know that? I mean, can we acknowledge that? That's where it came from, Indigenous people. They had this institute, and this Ruhi process came from their experience and their interacting with the revelation. It's happening already. The world is transforming through these Indigenous interactions, and these Indigenous potentials are being released. I'm so, I wish I could be there to be there with that. I started a junior youth group down in Santiago, Chile, and it was years ago, and they went all the way through. I was just there for a couple of weeks, but just to be there for a few minutes when somebody was able to start a junior youth group, there's so much power there. There's so much energy in the junior youth, and there's hardship. My relatives commit suicide regularly, and it happens when we can't reach them. It's continuing to happen where Indigenous people are committing suicide, junior youth, middle schoolers, 10, 11 years old, and here's the difference, is if all these traumas, learn about your own traumas, learn about your own Indigenous identity, learn about the Baha'i Faith, bring your own perspective, reconcile the different, the things that you don't understand, forge a new identity through that, become the kind of Indigenous person that you can be through this revelation. It's much more powerful than if the revelation never came. We can be Indigenous Baha'is in a way that we couldn't be. We could be powerful in a way we couldn't be if Baha'u'llah never came. And there's hope. The Glimmerings of Hope is the second book, and Breezes of Confirmation is a powerful, powerful book. And these are Indigenous stories. This is Indigenous storytelling. It's, so I'm just enthusiastic for anybody who's going to be starting a junior youth group, who's doing junior youth groups. I think every time you meet, even if it's like a couple of times, Abdu'l-Baha is right there with you, and this power and energy is channeled through you. The concourse is there to help you. and I'm there in spirit. I can't be everywhere, but I'm grateful for every junior youth group that I'm able to go to and to be a mentor and to be someone there to just genuinely be yourself. And to, if you're a youth, if you're somebody who, if you can work with youth, Indigenous youth working with Indigenous junior youth has power, and we can transform very quickly our communities. And I have to say that there's this shadow of suicides, and there's this brilliant light of the revelation, and it's affecting the world already. And there's so many people who have transformed and caught on fire and transformed their communities and transformed their families and themselves. I don't want to go on too long. I did want to offer a Navajo prayer as we close, but I just wanted to thank everybody for their sharing, and John and Athena and Jeff Kiely, you and the moderators. Thank you everybody for your, and everybody who brought questions. And even if you didn't speak up, I want to read all the questions and we can stay in touch, because this is a process. I wrote an article and I want to hear how some people have interacted with it, because I want to learn from you. What did you do when you put these ideas into practice? What is your junior youth group like? What is your community like? It's a conversation, and hopefully it's going to continue long after we're all gone. It started long before us.
Thank you, Alfred. That was very powerful. John, I'm just wondering if you could share a few closing words with us. And then I'll ask for the closing prayer, friends, because we're over our time. Thank you. John?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alfred. You expressed so much there that is so important for us to consider. One thing that I wanted to kind of finish with is this idea of connecting the Baha'u'llah's revelation, the coming of the Baha'i revelation, to prophecies of many indigenous peoples. And one of them is Black Elk's view. He was Lakota. He witnessed the battle against Yellow Hair, right, Custer. But he says he was a visionary, a shaman. And he says, "Then I was standing on the highest mountain of them all, and round about beneath me was the whole hoop of the world. And while I stood there, I saw more than I can tell, and understood more than I saw. For I was seeing in a sacred manner the shapes of all things in the spirit, and the shape of all shapes as they must live together like one being. And I saw the sacred hoop of my people was one of many hoops that made one circle, wide as daylight and as starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all the children of one mother and one father. And I saw that it was holy." So that's what we need to reconnect with, is this idea that God continues his work. God continues her work. God continues the all that is there for us. And more than anything, this is a mystical process. We are all parts of it. We all play our share. We are all in this field. We are cultivating human hearts, and that's what we must do. And Abdu'l-Baha says, and this is what I repeatedly call to my mind, it is your duty, he says, to be exceedingly kind to every human being and to wish him well. So there's more that I can talk about in prophecy, but my heart goes out to all of you. Thank you so much in the panel, also for the people that attended today. The this really has helped me in many ways that you can't even fathom to heal. And we will continue. We will continue. And much love to you all.
Thank you, John. Merci. I just want to thank all of our panelists here today, obviously to John Fitzgerald Medina, Alfred Kahn Jr., Athena Pratt, and to Jeff Kiely. We're so greatly thankful for all of your time. Thank you for everybody joining us from all parts of the globe, it seemed today, which was fantastic. Just want to shout out to Niloufar Gordon from the ABS office in Ottawa, and also to Ben Altair, who's helping us with the technical support here. And just really want to thank everybody for joining us today again. There are other Indigenous sessions in ABS over the next week. Please watch for those. Jelena Bighorn is speaking, I believe, on July, what's the date there, Niloufar? Help me out, sorry. So watch.
I think she's on Thursday.
Thursday, thank you. And then on next Saturday, July 31st, is a very special gathering with Roshan Dinesh, Jordan Bighorn, who's actually on the call right now, and with Mary Ellen Turpel Lafond is a keynote for next Saturday. So thank you again, everybody. And please, Martha, your son is going to say our closing prayer. All my relations.
Sit up here. Yeah, my bad. I don't know what song. We have a couple of songs, so
we're gonna sing. He's gonna sing a Caddo song from the Hasine Nipa tribe, and this song uses the word Kootsi, and it's praying to God that God will keep us humble.
Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, no. Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene. Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, no. Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, no. Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, Kotsayana, Yana Witsena, Hene, no.
Which one will be?
Thank you. That was beautiful. Alfred, could you maybe close us off in your Indigenous prayer, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Deja leje na sosin be se nze she dihin lini do ta ni ya sligo shinga bits dia ana asigo sha adego ako yake hajogo be Ahli do she ikle do de niye de be shilito do sheke ahligo shigiran niklido da atego shat atego be neshe billigo nekisito ta niya el tiyenlin ta nienlini do ne diga da ta nishigo ne ili ziyin ta asle je bi nacho yoga jana haslin jana haslin jana haslin jana haslin
Miigwech. Merci. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week at the ABS conference, and thank you for joining us, all my relations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
A great session.
Thank you so much.
Merci
beaucoup.
beaucoup.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
I just pulled John's book off my bookshelf. It's been a long time since I've looked at it. I'm really looking forward to reading it. Thank you for doing this, John.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Much love to you.
Would you please put that book title in the chat?
You can see John's books in the presentation page.
Very good.
Where,
Thank you.
Where you saw they're listed there, and there are links to the U.S. Baha'i distribution service where you can find them as well.
Thank you.
And the links to Alfred's article and also to the entire issue actually of the journal was dedicated to Indigenous issue. You can find that on his page in the program.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, everybody, for this most beautiful session. We're gonna close the call right now. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you, Nilufar.
Thank you, all my relations.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.